On behalf of my board of directors, our funder, and my entire team, welcome to the 2016 National Charter Schools Conference. We are thrilled to be in Nashville and in Tennessee this year. Most people know Nashville as Music City, but to us, Nashville is also home to some of the highest achieving and most innovative charter schools in the country. Nashville only has a handful of charter schools, but they account for nearly 40% of the city's reward schools. These are schools that are in the top 5% in terms of academic achievement and top 5% in terms of academic growth. I visited one of these schools last year, Valor Academy. Valor happens to be in the top 1% in academic growth and achievement. Valor's leaders are brothers Todd and Darren Dixon. Todd and Darren moved to Nashville to open a school that would attract a diverse student population, a school that uses time, technology, and relationships in unique ways to offer a personalized learning environment for each of their students. Walking into Valor feels like walking into a Silicon Valley startup, one where the teachers are the mentors and the students are the engineers, paving their own journey. Now, when we talk about innovation and the future of our schools, in my opinion, we're talking about schools like Valor, schools of choice that are testing new ways of teaching and transferring what they learn to the larger public school system. But Tennessee is also leading the way in another core commitment in the chartering space: equity. Tennessee's Achievement School District, which was led until recently by our good friend Chris Barbick, former head of Yes Prep, and now by Malika Anderson, who is in the house with us today, is at the center of a grand experiment. They are testing whether our highest performing charter networks can turn around some of the poorest performing schools in this state. Now, it's too soon to declare victory, but the early results are promising. Many of our charter leaders are eager to take on these challenging schools. They are committed, not just in serving the families who are engaged enough to send their children to these schools, but all students who need a better education. Now, as Roland mentioned, this month also marks the 25th anniversary of the passage of the nation's very first charter school law. Do you all remember what you were doing in 1991? Yeah? Well, here's where I was. I was just wrapping up an internship with my Senator John Warner of Virginia. And based on my haircut, I was probably spending a little too much time watching music videos. What else was going on? Well, for starters, Facebook, Google, and Twitter didn't exist back then. In fact, the first text wasn't sent in this country until 1992. Paula Abdul and Luther Vandross were on top of the music charts. And the Minnesota Twins won the World Series that year, which is fitting because Minnesota had just passed the nation's very first charter school law, thanks to our good friend, Ember Reichgott-Young, who's in the house with us today. I don't know where you are, Ember, but thank you for everything that you did. Bill Clinton, who launched his run for the White House that year, was a fan. He talked about charter schools on the campaign trail back then when no one knew what they were. In the last 25 years, 42 other states and DC have joined Minnesota in enacting a public charter school law. Today, we now have 6,800 public charter schools serving nearly 3 million families and 150,000 teachers. Now, if you're a teacher teaching at a charter school, please stand up now so that we can recognize and salute you. Even more important than our growing numbers is our growing impact. This past year, the nonprofit group Education Cities took a look at those schools that were doing the best job of closing the achievement gap. And guess what they found? Nearly 30% of these schools were charter schools. Charter schools are only 7% of schools around the country, but they comprise 30% of the schools that are closing the achievement gap. Here in Nashville, that number is 60%. But there's still far too many communities in this country, and in fact, few states, where you don't have a single charter school. This is not for a lack of demand. According to our latest national survey, nearly 80% of parents believe that all families should have the option to send their children to a school of their choice. And 30% would like to send their children to a charter school, even if they have never seen a charter school in their community. These numbers are even higher when you poll low-income communities. All told, about 5 million parents would select a charter school as their first choice if there was a charter school in their community. So as we peer into the future, what can we do to make sure that these great schools are available to more families around the country? Now, I'm a football fan, so I sometimes feel that we in the charter school movement are good at getting the ball to the 20-yard line, but we simply can't get to the end zone for those big touchdowns. Or sometimes we may settle for a few field goals too quickly. So there's several areas we need to focus on in order to be successful at our game. First, of course, is focusing on our state laws and the regulatory climate that they create. You can be, as I've said before, you can be in a state that has a great law, but if the school district doesn't want you to exist, if you don't have access to facilities, then it's pretty difficult to operate a school. Second, access to startup dollars. This is where our friends at the Walton Family Foundation and the federal government have done the best job to make sure that newcomers have access to these funds, and now that there is funding available for the replication and expansion of the high-performing networks. Lastly, for the school leaders in the room, you can have all these ingredients, but if you don't have enough leaders who are trained to be in your schools, if you don't have enough teachers who want to teach in your schools, that talent pipeline matters, right? So we need to make sure we're doing a much better job of training teachers and leaders for our charter schools. But compounding these problems is the national conversation about charter schools. Take a look at what people are saying about charter schools on social media. We did this survey last year. For every positive story on charter schools right now, we are hit with 3 negative ones. We have a great story to tell, but right now, our opposition is grabbing most of the attention and telling their version of the story. Our opposition is fighting us with compelling lies, and we're responding with scatter plots and with research. As my good friend Howard Fuller has said, and likely will say again today, we are still busy in this movement making an academic case for charter schools when our opposition is out to destroy us. We can't let our future growth depend on people who oppose us. If we're going to take our work to scale, in my opinion, we need to start playing better offense. So think for a moment of Peyton Manning, who led his college football career just down the road at the University of Tennessee, not some defensive lineman who's getting clobbered. For starters, we need to start making our case for charter schools to people everywhere, not just in the communities in which we serve, but in all the communities where we can do so much good. Like in rural America, where currently less than 30% of high school graduates are going on to college. Our recent victories in Alabama and Oklahoma should pave the way for this fight. Now, there's a lot of talk lately about whether we are a movement. As you know, I come from a country, Iran, where people's rights are severely limited. Even the right to vote is restricted. Brave people rally for this fundamental right. Now, as far as I'm concerned, the right to send your child to a good school is as fundamental a right than the right to vote. And we need to start fighting for this right the same way that all the major social movements in this country fought for their causes. All of the major movements in the past century, from the women's rights movement to the civil rights movement to the marriage equality movement, have had one goal in mind: success everywhere, not just in 43 states, success in 50 states, equal opportunity across America. Now, this doesn't mean that you have to have a charter school in every community, but it does mean that every community should be open to parents making that choice. Advancing these principles is as fundamental to our success as opening another charter school down the street. The second way to improve our offense is to amplify the voices of our parents and community leaders. One of the resources that we don't often tap into is our families. An active dad or mom is a force to be reckoned with. So let's start better mobilizing our parents. We saw it this past year in Washington State. After the state Supreme Court struck down the voter-enacted charter school law in that state, parents, school leaders, teachers, and students rallied to save their charter schools. They flooded the halls of the legislatures to let their legislator know that charter schools are places of inspiration, of hope, and of opportunity. And they won. The legislature passed a bipartisan law to keep charter schools open and to provide funding for them to grow. The conversation in Washington State wasn't about the kind of schools students should attend. It was about making sure that every child was attending the best school. The conversation didn't feature some policy wonk yammering about the theory of change. It featured the faces and the voices of the students who were in charter schools. Faces of those like Natalie Johnson and her daughter, Victoria. Natalie enrolled her daughter at a charter school after just one recommendation because she was so desperate to give Victoria a better education. It just so happens she picked one of the best schools in our movement, Summit, in Washington State. As Natalie puts it, we need to put pressure on our existing system to do better. Once they see all of our successes, they have to change based on what's working. The need is too great not to. We need many more moms and dads to be as engaged as Natalie is. Parents have so much power to advocate for their children and open the doors to more charter schools. Let's help them use it. The third way to up our game is to engage much more aggressively at the federal level. I say this to you all every year, but this year is actually quite important. In case you haven't noticed, we have an election this fall. The federal government has been one of our best friends when it comes to supporting charter schools since Bill Clinton took office. He even came to this conference in 2011. Presidents Bush and Obama have also been strong charter school supporters. But come January, we'll have a new president in the White House. The Democrat candidate is certainly not as enthusiastic or as vocal about her support for charters as her husband was. The Republican candidate is, shall we say, a little difficult to define. This makes Senate and House races all the more important. We need to make sure that the next president, whoever he or she may be, has to work with a Congress that's filled with charter school supporters. As you know, our work at the federal level is rooted in growing the amount of funding that's available for public charter schools, both to launch and to replicate and expand. We scored a major victory 6 months ago when Congress approved an $80 million increase for the charter school program. To keep federal funding, thank you. To keep federal funding flowing and to maintain strong federal support, we need to make sure that federal leaders know who you are. And so our call to action today is a pretty simple one. Let's open the doors to more charter schools so that many more families can enroll their children in these great schools. We're currently at 3 million families. Let's raise that number to 4 million by 2020. After 25 years, we have some amazing schools offering a high-quality education to students across the country. We just need more of them in order to make sure that 1 million more families, 1 million more students have access to the education that they deserve. And that's going to require strong federal support. So let's make it happen right now. What I want you to do now is to take out your cell phones. I know you all have cell phones, so please take your cell phones out. Now I want you to text charters to 52886. Charters to 52886. We will then send you a link that you can use to send a tweet or a Facebook post urging Secretary Clinton and Donald Trump to open the doors to more charter schools. And in the future, we'll let you know when it's time to raise the volume on social media, when it's time to send that email to your members of Congress, or when it's time to rally your parents in support of more charter schools. Our movement can lead public education into a future of better and more personalized education for every student. But we all have to start wearing that advocacy hat to remind ourselves every day that we're part of a larger movement. Each of us is a leader in a great social movement, and like the movement leaders of the past, we cannot quit until we succeed everywhere. I hope you'll join me in this journey, and I hope that the next few days will leave you energized and inspired to be the leaders that our movement needs. Thank you very much.